Hi there, I'm Lily. Welcome to my YouTube channel and welcome to my tutorial for assembling the Boulevard bag, my latest pattern release. So here I have a sample of my Boulevard bag which has all the knitting complete, all the ends woven in, the strap has been made, and now all that's left is to actually assemble it. So in this video I'll be showing you how to do exactly that. So to make the bag up you will need obviously the finished bag and everything, also a zip. I'm using a 10-inch zip, dress zip that closes at both ends. That's important that it's not an open-ended zip. So I picked this up from Abercan, and it's fine if your zip is a little bit too long because you can always fold it over and sew a little bit up, but obviously if it's too short then you'll have a problem. So err on the side of too long when it comes to a zip. And then the main thing that really gives this bag structure and that I'll be showing you how to insert are the cable ties. So here I have 8 cable ties ready. I may use 12, I'm not sure. In my first sample I inserted 3 cable ties through each section. This one I think I might just stick with 2. So these are the magic ingredient, the cable ties. So these are the exact cable ties I used, which are 380mm long and 4.8mm wide. And I would recommend, if you can get hold of basically find the longest cable ties you can get hold of, or anything else that will actually add structure. Somebody suggested using corset boning. I'm sure there are various things that I haven't thought of that could be used, but basically something flexible but non-stretch is the key here. So I'll just show you how these will be used. That as you create the tucks by working a little fold in your fabric, then you create a channel that this cable tie can be poked through. Slightly awkward there, are we at the end? Almost. You just have to make sure that it doesn't poke out any of the sides anywhere. And there we go, I've just poked one through and I will add another couple into that section, but you can already see it gives it a really nice structure. This particular bag I held 4 strands of yarn together, so it was super dense to knit with, very firm. Was quite hard on my hands to knit, but I kind of wanted to test the limits of knitted fabric and see how firm you could go. And here we go, I'll then be adding another one going the other way. Oh, trying to do that with my left hand. A bit difficult. Poke that through the other way, and then we have even more structure. So this is kind of the basic principle of it, inserting something through that will give a really firm finish there, and insert as many through as you can fit, to be honest. I think I'll probably go with 2 for this one, but anyway, I'm not actually going to do that yet. The first step will be to insert the zip. We'll of course need a needle and thread and some pins, just general basic sewing supplies for this. So I conveniently have a little sewing tin with some hand needles and then thread that matches pretty well. So this is what I'm going to use. Of course, depending on your colour, it may work better to find a thread that matches the zip or matches the strap or matches the bag, whatever works for you. I've gone with a kind of mid-pink because I don't want it to stand out too much. It's not going to be an invisible zip because we can't sew right up to the teeth of the zip because the fluff will get caught in it, but it can be fairly well hidden. So I shall pin the zip in place first. As I said, it's okay if your zip is a little bit too long, but not too short. So I'll make sure that the top end of the zip, does this count as the top end? I'm not actually technically sure. I'll make sure that this is lined up and any excess is at the other end at the bottom of the zip. Just going to pin this in place. Ow! Probably going to happen a few times. I'm trying to take care not to stretch the knitted fabric or buckle it, just trying to make sure that it's nice and flat. Although obviously as I actually put the pins in it kind of buckles a bit, but I'll do my best. If you have a suitable sewing machine, this step could be done on a machine. So I've pinned one side in place there. It looks like it's rippling. I think that's just kind of because of the pins, but as I go I'll try to make sure that it lays nice and flat. So I'm just going to sew this zip in place using a simple back stitch, I think. I've cut one strand of thread that I have then doubled over so that I can use a loop start. Plenty long there, long enough. So now I'll just begin, take out my first pin, just anchor this at the very beginning. Leave a loop so that I can come back through that loop and it is secured in place. Now I'll just work along this edge using relatively small stitches. She says that looks quite large. Just stitching the zip into position along the top edge of the bag. I'm working from the outside. I'm not trying to do this with right sides together. I think the fabric's just a bit too thick and that would be a bit unwieldy. Working along here with a back stitch once I get into the flow. Again, taking care that I don't accidentally pull this fabric out or buckle it up as I go, just aiming for them to both be nice and flat really. My knitted fabric does not have a lot of stretch or give because I knit it so densely, but if yours is more stretchy then you'll have to be a little bit more careful there that you don't distort the edge. There are several reasons why fluffy yarn is best for this bag. It holds its shape best and it means that you can make quite a dense fabric because the fluff can kind of compress down and then expand out again to fill the gaps. When you're actually knitting it, you can squish that yarn down to be really thin and then it will kind of bloom and expand once it's off the needles. So the fluffy yarn is really ideal in that way. And it's also quite handy that at this stage I don't really need to worry about my sewing stitches being seen. It all gets hidden in the marred fluffiness anyway. As you can see, I have just attached the first side of the zip there, that is in place. And even just with the zip added, there is some additional structure to the bag already. It kind of wants to flip back on itself, but once it's all in place, that will be absolutely fine. I think that lays nice and flat there, so don't do what I did and cut off too little thread and then have to rejoin it halfway through. But now we're going to repeat on the other side. So obviously now I have to take care to make sure that the second side matches the first and that everything lines up correctly. And as I'm right-handed, this time I worked from the zip end down to the bottom, and this time on the second side I'll be working from this end along this way just because I find it much easier being right-handed. But whatever works best for you, if you can sew in that direction, then that might be easier. I'm now going to pin the second side in place to match the first side. It's slightly awkward, but not too bad. I'm going to do that with the zip closed, and then obviously to actually sew it I will open the zip, but it's easier to make sure it matches up if I do this with the zip closed. Like I said, a little bit awkward really, but in fact I might just make sure that this top end where the actual zipper goes matches. Need to make sure that the fabric goes at least to the end of the zipper here, otherwise if the zip goes up beyond the edge of the knitted fabric there, then it's going to be quite awkward at the next stage because there'll be too much metal bulk there, so make sure that goes up to there. Now I'm going to repeat exactly the same process, sewing the zip in place along this side. Second side of my zip is now sewn in and it's beginning to look a little bit more like a bag. So the next stage is where it gets a little bit more unusual. So as I said, I'm going to use the cable ties. So right now is where I'm going to actually insert all the cable ties through, ready to secure them in place. So they should slide through fairly easily, to be honest. Depending on what you're actually using here, if you're using cable ties then it's pretty simple because they're nice and slippy and plastic and have a pointed yet rounded end that is just conveniently easy to slide through. If you're using something else such as corset boning or something else, then it may be slightly trickier to actually get this through, but hopefully it's not too bad. And I think, yes, I'm going to use 2 in each section probably for this bag. Maybe 3. Let's just try 3. I used 3 for my original black and white version. 3 is a bit more of a squeeze there, but it does make it nice and robust, so I'll go with 3. 3 through there. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Don't worry about all the ends hanging out there. We'll deal with that later. So now I'm going to do the same thing through the curved edge. It'll be a little awkward finding where to actually poke the cable tie in, but once it's in it should go okay. And again, slightly awkward around the corner, just kind of ease it through. There we go, we're moving. So I've inserted one from this end, and then I'll insert another from the other end. So this is where it's handy to have the longest cable ties that you can find, because otherwise if you only have the really short ones, then they won't actually go all the way through. You'd have to insert one from this end and it will kind of go to the middle, and then another from that end and it'll go to round the middle. But if you have these long ones that go all the way round, or at least almost all the way round, then that does make life easier. Where did that get to? I think we're about there. Let's keep going. Will that go? So actually this one doesn't quite reach all the way round. This bag sample is slightly bigger than my original one, but that's okay as long as it goes to most of the way round. So there will be plenty overlap now when I insert one from the other direction. They will still overlap for a good portion of it. The second one is always much easier to poke through than the first, she says. It's a bit snug there. So that's 2 cable ties around there. I think I might leave it at 2 for that section. And you can see it's really given the bag a lovely structure there, holding its shape very well. And then this side, it is still kind of structured, but not quite to the same extent. It doesn't kind of look as boxy. So now I'll insert the ties through on this side. Almost there. Just try to make sure it actually pokes out through the proper gap at the other end, not through a random hole in the middle of a stitch, as has happened there. Don't know if you can see there, it's like split a stitch there right at the very end, so I'll just have to kind of poke around with that. Sorry, there's not really more technical ways of explaining this other than poke around, to make sure that that goes through the actual tuck and doesn't unintentionally poke out through any gaps between stitches. Now I've inserted that one from right to left, so this one I will poke along the same gap from left to right. So I now have 2 through that top section, and I'm going to add a third in for good measure like I did on the other side. Why not? You could kind of, in theory, add as many layers, as much structure as you possibly can or as you would like in this section. So there we go, that's 3 running through there, nice and firm. Need a couple more. You might find you have to twist it around a little when you get to these. Actually, I'll go from this side, it'll be a bit easier. When you get to the corners. So this pattern includes 2 versions. One, my original black and white version, which is a bit more semicircular. And then this version, I made it slightly more angular, mainly just so that I can fit a phone flat at the bottom a little bit easier. I mean, I used the other one. I took it to Copenhagen with me last weekend, and me and my friend both used it all weekend, and it was absolutely fine, carrying quite a lot, but I just wanted one to have a slightly different shape. So there are 2 options. Just be careful if this happens. It's not the end of the world, obviously. You just pull it back, but it kind of takes a bit of easing to get around, there we go, around those corners without poking through. This is where it's helpful that it's a nice dense fabric. So I used 2 strands of DK weight cotton held together for these tucks, and I used a 4mm needle, so it is super dense and the cotton is nice and smooth. So this is where if you'd used a wool or something, which I really don't recommend for this section, you might find more issues with it snagging. But densely knit cotton is the way forward for this section. Are we in? Where are we up to? You can see it's very satisfying as it takes shape as you poke it through. Okay, so that's last but one cable tie in, And now I will just poke the final one through from this end. Okay, that's going fairly easily, I think, just following the route of the previous one. There we go. So that is 10 cable ties in this one bag here. Now if I just do the zip up, so you can see what I mean about the shape, slightly more boxy. It's still kind of semicircle, but not quite as smooth. Zip in place. It still wants to poke up a bit, but that's fine. Taking shape. So the next step is to attach the strap, which I have here. So this is worked in double knitting. So you have a nice double-sided fabric, which has a little bit of give, but it's fairly firm. I use 2 strands of cotton held together, exactly the same as for the tucks for the strap. And we're going to insert the strap and close these ends at the same time. So basically the strap is going to be trapped, oh, this is a bit awkward, inside between these layers here. The strap's going to be trapped in there. And if this was all really loose, bendy fabric and it wasn't structured, then I would be able to just turn the whole lot inside out and sew it with those layers trapped in there. But because the whole point of this is that it's very firm and structured and that it has plastic through it holding it together, that doesn't really work. So it is slightly more awkward. So step number 1 is going to be to chop these cable ties to the correct length and secure the ends of them, which is easier the first time round. So I have some tape here, just regular sellotape as far as I'm aware. I don't think there's anything fancy about it. And then I'm just going to tape these 2 pieces together. So I can slide them along a bit and tape it at some point here. In fact, I'll chop them first. Oh, 3 pieces even. So you might find you need quite firm, strong scissors for this job. And it's easier to chop one at a time. Try and make sure those are all at the same angle, all ending together there, because you don't want any snaggy bits if possible. And then just pull off a little piece of tape. And then as close to the end as possible, tape. Oh, again, slightly fiddly. Tape those cable ties together. Ideally without too much tape hanging off the end, because then that might stick, but you want to kind of cover it as best as possible. So have a slightly more blunt end and those taped together. And then I'm going to repeat that process for all of the ends at this side of the bag. Don't need to worry about this end yet, we'll deal with that later. All of the ends here, because I'm going to sew this end of the zip first. So I've just taped both ends here of the top sections of cable ties so they can be poked back through. You want to poke them so that they're just inside the end. This is where you had to be careful that you don't have excess tape, otherwise it will be snagging. Just pull those back through so they're hidden. And then with my first version, which was slightly smaller, I had 2 ends of cable ties here which I needed to tape together. With this particular version, there's only this one end that actually reaches, because the other end coming from that direction is somewhere around here, it doesn't actually reach. So in this case, all I'll need to do is trim off the knobbly bit there. I won't need to actually tape anything, but depending on your size of cable tie, size of bag, or whatever you choose to use, you might need to also tape this bit, this section. So I just can poke that. It's a bit awkward. It's a bit of the theme of the video, is it's all slightly awkward. So all of these cable tie ends are trimmed. You can see them just kind of poking there, but they're trimmed to the correct length, and I have got rid of the little knobbly bit. So what I'm going to do now, the first step, we will be trapping this inside here, but it's kind of easier to keep it out of the way just for the time being while you do these first few stitches, which the purpose of these first couple of stitches is going to be to attach these ends together. Hopefully you can see that. So these 2 ends here that aren't attached together at the moment, we want that to be a nice clean line going all the way round like a border. So I'm going to sew those together. There isn't really a technical stitch that I would suggest using for this, just kind of going through. So I've attached my thread to one side. In fact, I'm going to undo the zip, that might make this a bit easier. And now I'm just going to go through, insert one stitch through the other side and kind of just alternate between the 2. I guess kind of similar to how you would do mattress stitch, just to secure these two piping edges together, and obviously then the cable ties are trapped inside. There. So as you can see, the more I sew, probably about 6 stitches on each side, maybe going back and forth, one's through this side, one's through the other side, just moving around the tuck until it is nice and secure. Again, not in any particular system, but one on one side, then one on the other, and pulling it, kind of easing it into place. So there we are, there now they meet there. Now this is where it gets a little bit awkward. So make sure that your zip is poked through to the inside there. We want that out of the way. Doesn't really matter which end you start with here, to be honest. Now take your strap, and make sure all your ends are woven in before this stage actually, and poke that through this gap here. So hypothetically, or in theory, it only needs to be just about inside, but I found it was just easier if I pulled a couple of centimetres of the strap through to the inside. It just kind of made this stage a bit simpler. And now, effectively, like I said, if we could turn it all inside out, I'd just go through all the layers. But because that's impossible, I'm going to have to go from the outside. So inserting my needle from the top through this first layer here of the gusset, not the gusset section, the top bit where the zipper is attached, through there, and then I'm going to go through my strap, through my handle, and kind of pull that over so it's out of the way. Oh, it pops out, so after we've done a few stitches it won't pop out. And then once I turn it on end, this is where it's handy that it's so structured because it will stand on its end. I'm now going to go from the outside, under just one stitch of this section, and then I'm going to go back and forth basically through the strap, back through the strap there to this side, and now under a stitch of this section. So my needle goes through there. I'm going to keep going like this across to the other side, and then I will do the same going back just to make sure it's extra secure. And keep kind of pulling it tight as you go along, obviously making sure that you're using robust sewing thread, and trying to kind of keep track, looking at which stitch I'm going through because it wants to ping around all over the place, trying to make sure that I'm actually sewing in a straight line across here, that my stitching isn't going like wibbling down here or up there. Pull that tight under the next one there. So this has the same end effect as if I had turned it all inside out and sandwiched the strap in between the two layers of the actual bag. Has the same end result, but without actually having to do it like that, because that will be very tricky. I tried. Obviously at this point you'll soon reach where you're going through the zip fabric as well, not just the actual knitted fabric, so make sure you catch all layers there. And you will at some point need to actually do the zip up a little bit to be able to make sure that you sew it in place properly. Keep that fabric pinched. If you find it easier to insert pins or clips or something somewhere, then by all means go ahead. I found it just kind of made life a bit more difficult rather than easier, but whatever works for you. Going across the gusset here. Obviously, as I said, this was 4 strands of yarn for the main body of it, so it is super dense, thick fabric. My first version that was just in a boucle held with alpaca was dense but not stiff to the same degree, so it wasn't quite so unwieldy at this stage. And exactly the same, you'll probably have 1 stitch in the middle here, depending how closely you sewed it, where you're not actually inserting your needle through any knitted stitches at all, it's just zip. In the centre, back through the strap. Oh, I've gone a little bit high there, I think. Like I said, just try and keep an eye on that you're going in a straight line. You can see it taking shape there. And like I said, I'll go across to this side, secure these ends here, and then I'll work my way back and kind of pull tight and neaten up any stitches that look like they need it. I've made it across to the other side, which as you can see still needs to be secured, so I'll repeat the process of going through one stitch on this piece, one stitch on this piece, and then I might kind of also tuck my needle through there just to pull all this section in together basically and make sure it's nice and secure. So I'm going to go through one stitch of that tuck, poke those plastic ties out of the way, one stitch through this tuck and pull and repeat. One through this one, one through this one and pull together. So you can see it all coming together there now, nice and neatly. Everything is now actually secured in place at this end, but I'm just going to, since I have extra thread and it doesn't hurt to be extra secure, I'm just going to go back the way I came, repeating the process of going through one stitch of this layer, then through the strap, then through this layer, across back to the other side. Everything is now secured and in place nice and neatly at this end, so I'll now repeat the process at the other end. Obviously there is still lots of excess cable tie at this end, so we'll need to deal with that first. This time we can't just randomly tape it anywhere and then poke it through. You need to push this along as far as it will go to the other end, so you make sure that's nice and secure there, and then kind of mark with your finger where that end reaches to, and then pull it out slightly just so that you have some wiggle room to cut it. So if I push mine right in, it goes to there where my thumb is. Pull that out, I'll just keep hold of that exact spot, and now I'm going to trim them to that length. I have to go through each one individually because they're quite thick. Now I'll tape them exactly the same as for the first side. Just a piece of tape about this long should be enough to go around a couple of times. You can push the fabric out of the way just while we actually do this taping. Try and keep them close together. Get it all nice and neat and tight. Wrap that around there. And now in theory when we push that back in it should just be just the right length. There we go. It's just hidden inside, and then like just with the same as for the first side, this piece I'm just going to trim that off. If you've got multiple ends poking out there, you will need to tape them together. But now you can see this side is ready to go, and I'll just repeat for this side. Now I have everything ready at this end to repeat exactly as for the first side, so make sure your strap isn't twisted, that would not be ideal. So we have the strap ready, I'm going to poke that through there and then repeat exactly as I did for the first side. And here is the finished bag with everything sewn into place, nice and secure there. Zip opens nice and smoothly, plenty of room for all sorts of things in there. I just tucked the end of the zip inside. You could trim that if you really wanted to, but don't see any particular need. And there we go, finished Boulevard bag.